I used to believe that love meant sacrifice, that being a good daughter, a good sister, a good person meant putting everyone else's needs before my own, no matter the cost. My name is Sarah Chen, and for 28 years I lived my life as a supporting character in everyone else's story. I was the reliable one, the one who never complained, the one who always said yes. I thought this made me virtuous. I was wrong. Growing up in a traditional Chinese-American household in San Francisco, I learned early that my role was to be the bridge between my immigrant parents and the American dream they desperately wanted for my younger brother Kevin. While Kevin was encouraged to pursue his passions, to take risks, to be bold, I was taught to be practical, responsible, and selfless. When my parents struggled with English, I translated at parent-teacher conferences from age 8. When they couldn't understand tax documents or insurance forms, I handled them. When Kevin needed tutoring, expensive sports equipment, or college application fees, I worked part-time jobs to help pay for it all. My parents owned a small grocery store in Chinatown, and every day after school I would go straight there to help stock shelves, work the register, and handle customer complaints. I watched my friends go to after-school activities, sleepovers, and movies, while I counted inventory and swept floors. When I expressed interest in joining the debate team or taking art classes, my mother would look at me with that familiar expression of disappointment and say, "Sarah, we need you here. Family comes first. Kevin has potential, and we must help him succeed." The disparity in treatment became more pronounced as we entered our teenage years. When Kevin wanted to join the school's expensive lacrosse team, my parents found a way to pay the fees and buy him professional equipment. When I asked about piano lessons, which cost half as much, my mother sighed and said we couldn't afford luxuries. When Kevin's grades dropped because he was spending too much time socializing, they hired a private tutor at $60 an hour. When my own grades suffered because I was working 30 hours a week at the store, they told me I needed to manage my time better. Kevin was 3 years younger than me, charming and athletic, with an easy smile that made everyone adore him. He was the golden child who could do no wrong, while I was the workhorse who kept everything running. When he struggled with math, I spent hours tutoring him, often staying up past midnight to help him understand concepts that came easily to me. When he wanted to play football, I worked extra shifts at the store and took on weekend babysitting jobs to help pay for equipment. When he decided he wanted to attend St. Ignatius, an expensive private school across town, I deferred my college acceptance for a year to work full-time and help with tuition. The sacrifice felt enormous at the time, but my parents assured me it was temporary. "Just 1 year, Sarah," my mother said, holding my hands as tears streamed down her face. "Kevin needs this opportunity to get into a good college. Once he's established, we'll make sure you get your chance too." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The idea that my sacrifice was meaningful, that it would be remembered and repaid, made the disappointment bearable. During that gap year I worked 50 hours a week at the store and took an additional part-time job cleaning offices downtown. I watched my high school friends post photos from their college dorms, their new roommates, their exciting classes, while I spent my days restocking produce and my evenings mopping floors in empty buildings. The loneliness was crushing, but I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that my turn would come. I told myself this was temporary, that once Kevin was established, it would be my turn. I believed that my sacrifice would be recognized and rewarded, that my parents would eventually see how much I had given up for the family. I was naive enough to think that love was a bank account where deposits would eventually yield returns. When Kevin's senior year arrived, the college application process consumed our household. My parents hired a college counselor, paid for SAT prep courses, and arranged campus visits to elite universities. I helped Kevin with his essays, drove him to interviews, and even paid for some of his application fees with money I had earned cleaning offices. When he got accepted to Stanford with a partial scholarship, the celebration lasted for weeks. Relatives called to congratulate my parents on raising such a successful son. Neighbors stopped by the store to offer their praise. Kevin was the pride of our family, the proof that the American dream was within reach. College was supposed to be my escape, my chance to finally live for myself. I had saved enough money and earned enough scholarships to attend UC Berkeley, where I planned to study business. But 2 weeks before my freshman year was supposed to begin, my father had a heart attack. The medical bills were overwhelming, and the store was struggling without his daily presence. Kevin was starting his freshman year at Stanford and needed money for textbooks, dorm supplies, and living expenses. The family needed me to stay home, work full-time, and help keep everything afloat. The morning after my father's heart attack, as I sat in the hospital waiting room still wearing the clothes I had slept in, my mother turned to me with exhausted eyes and said, "Sarah, we need you now more than ever. The store can't survive without someone reliable running it, and Kevin can't drop out of Stanford. Not when he's so close to achieving everything we've worked for. Just for 1 year," my mother promised, tears in her eyes as she held my hands. "After Kevin graduates and gets his scholarships, you can go to school. We will make sure of it." I deferred my acceptance again, believing in her promise, believing that my sacrifice mattered. But that 1 year revealed just how dependent the family had become on my labor. I wasn't just helping at the store, I was essentially running it. I managed the books, handled supplier relationships, dealt with difficult customers, and worked 7 days a week to keep the business afloat while my father recovered. When Kevin came home for winter break, tan and happy with stories about fraternity parties and study abroad opportunities, he seemed like a visitor from another world. That 1 year turned into 2, then 3. Kevin graduated with honors and received offers from several prestigious companies. My parents threw him a celebration party at the store, inviting all our relatives to praise their successful son. During the toasts, my uncle mentioned how lucky Kevin was to have such a supportive family, and my father, who had recovered from his heart attack but seemed content to let me handle the daily operations of the store, smiled proudly and said, "We always believed in investing in potential." The word potential hit me like a physical blow. I realized that in my parents' eyes, I had no potential worth investing in. I was useful, reliable, necessary, but not someone whose dreams mattered. When I brought up college again that fall, my mother sighed and said, "Sarah, you're already 21. Maybe it's time to be realistic. You have a job, you're helping the family. Some people are meant for school, and some people are meant for work." The casual dismissal of my dreams was devastating, but I had learned not to argue. Instead, I channeled my frustration into making the store more successful. I modernized our inventory system, negotiated better deals with suppliers, and even started a small catering business that brought in additional revenue. The store's profits increased by 30% during my 3rd year of management, but the extra money went toward Kevin's graduate school applications and my father's continuing medical treatments. I stayed. I convinced myself that I was being noble, that my sacrifice was meaningful. I worked at the store, managed the books, and slowly watched my dreams shrink until they fit into the space between closing time and sleep. I dated occasionally, but every relationship ended the same way. When men realized that my family obligations came before everything else, that I couldn't travel or take spontaneous trips because the store needed me, they drifted away. I told myself I was fine alone, that I didn't need romance when I had purpose. My social life became increasingly limited. Friends from high school who had gone away to college would visit during breaks, full of stories about internships, study abroad programs, and career opportunities. I smiled and asked interested questions while feeling like I was watching life through a window, forever on the outside looking in. Some friends tried to maintain our relationships, but as their lives became more complex, and mine remained static, we gradually lost touch. The isolation was compounded by my growing awareness that my role in the family was more servant than daughter. When Kevin visited from graduate school at Wharton, he would stay in his old room and expect me to do his laundry, cook his favorite meals, and drive him to meet up with his high school friends. He never offered to help at the store, never asked about my life, and seemed genuinely surprised when I expressed any opinion about anything other than business operations. Kevin thrived at Stanford and later at Wharton Business School. He joined prestigious organizations, networked with the children of Fortune 500 executives, and secured internships at top-tier consulting firms. Meanwhile, I learned every aspect of running the grocery store, from dealing with suppliers to managing inventory to handling the increasingly complex financial demands of keeping a small business alive in a gentrifying neighborhood. I became indispensable, which I mistook for valuable. During Kevin's 2nd year of business school, he started dating Jennifer Park, whose father owned a successful chain of Korean restaurants and whose mother was a respected physician. Jennifer was everything my parents had dreamed their daughter-in-law would be. Beautiful, accomplished, from a wealthy family, and pluttled uninterested in anything as mundane as a small grocery store. When Kevin brought her home for Chinese New Year, my parents treated her like visiting royalty while I served tea and tried to make conversation about her impressive internship at Goldman Sachs. I found myself comparing my life to Jennifer's and feeling like a failure. At 25, she was completing her MBA at Northwestern, had traveled to 4 continents, and spoke 3 languages fluently. At 25, I was still living in my childhood bedroom, working 7 days a week, and had never been anywhere more exotic than Sacramento. The comparison was painful and unavoidable. When Kevin graduated from Wharton, he moved to Los Angeles to work at McKinsey & Company. His starting salary was more than our store made in a good month, and his signing bonus alone could have paid for my entire college education. He visited home maybe 3 times a year, usually for major holidays, and always with stories about his exciting life. He had friends who worked at Google and Facebook. He lived in a sleek apartment in West Hollywood, and he was growing more serious with Jennifer, who had landed a prestigious job at a venture capital firm. The conversations during Kevin's visits always centered on his achievements, his career trajectory, and his relationship with Jennifer. My parents hung on every word, asking detailed questions about his work, his colleagues, and his future plans. When they occasionally asked about my life, it was usually in the context of store operations, or whether I had saved enough money to help with some family expense. I was 25 and still living in my childhood bedroom, still working at the store, still putting my life on hold for a family that seemed to forget I had once had dreams too. When friends from high school visited San Francisco, they would stop by the store with stories of their careers, their travels, their achievements. I smiled and congratulated them while feeling like I was performing a role in a play where everyone else had been given the good parts. The loneliness was becoming unbearable. I had acquaintances from the neighborhood, other store owners who would chat with me during slow periods, but no real friends. My last serious relationship had ended 2 years earlier when David, a teacher I had met at a community event, finally admitted that he couldn't handle dating someone whose family came before everything else. "I feel like I'm dating 3 people," he had said during our breakup conversation. "You, your mother, and your father, and I always come fourth." During this period, I began taking community college classes at night, telling myself that at least I was making some progress toward an education. I studied accounting and business management, skills that helped me run the store more efficiently, but also fed my growing hunger for intellectual challenge. My professors noticed my dedication and encouraged me to consider transferring to a 4-year university, but I always had an excuse. The store needed me. My father's health was fragile. The family was depending on me. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in March, 3 months after my 28th birthday. Kevin had called earlier that day to announce his engagement to Jennifer, and my parents were absolutely ecstatic. They immediately began planning an elaborate engagement party, discussing guest lists and venue options with an enthusiasm I had never seen them show for anything related to my life. The energy in our house shifted dramatically. Suddenly, everyone was animated and excited, making phone calls to relatives and researching catering options. That weekend, Kevin and Jennifer flew up from Los Angeles to meet with wedding planners and look at venues. I watched from the sidelines as my parents fawned over Jennifer's ring, her dress choices, and her ideas for the ceremony. They talked about the wedding as if it were the culmination of all their dreams, the moment when their investment in Kevin would finally pay the ultimate dividend, a successful marriage that would elevate the family's social status. Jennifer had specific ideas about the kind of wedding she wanted. She showed us photos from Pinterest of elaborate floral arrangements, 5-course dinner menus, and venues that looked like they belonged in magazines. Everything she described was expensive, but my parents nodded along enthusiastically, assuring her that cost was no object for such an important celebration. During the family dinner to celebrate the engagement, held at an upscale Chinese restaurant that cost more than we usually spent on food in a month, the conversation turned to finances. Kevin looked stressed as he explained that even with his McKinsey salary and Jennifer's venture capital income, the wedding they wanted would stretch their budget significantly. Jennifer's parents were contributing generously, but they expected the groom's family to match their investment. The wedding they wanted would cost at least $80,000, money the family didn't have in readily available cash. The store was profitable but not wildly so, and most of our money was tied up in inventory and equipment. My father's medical bills from his heart attack had depleted much of the family's savings, and Kevin's graduate school loans, which my parents had co-signed, were still being paid off. As the dinner conversation continued, I could see my parents growing increasingly anxious. They wanted to give Kevin the wedding he deserved, but they were clearly struggling with the financial reality. Jennifer seemed oblivious to their discomfort, continuing to describe her vision for the perfect day while my parents exchanged worried glances across the table. That's when my father turned to me with that familiar, expectant look, the same expression he had worn when asking me to defer college, to work extra hours, to sacrifice my own needs for the family's benefit. "Sarah, you've been working so hard all these years. You must have substantial savings by now. This is Kevin's special day and family needs to support each other. Can you help with the wedding costs?" The request hit me like a physical blow. Not only had they never acknowledged my sacrifices, but now they wanted me to pay for my brother's wedding with money I had saved over 7 years of deferring my own dreams. Money I had planned to use for finally going back to school, for starting my own life, for investing in my own future. Money I had earned through countless 60-hour work weeks, through years of choosing financial responsibility over personal enjoyment, through systematic self-denial that I had told myself would eventually pay off. "How much are you thinking?" I asked, my voice strangely calm despite the storm building inside me. I could feel Jennifer watching me with interest, probably calculating whether the Chen family could afford to match her parents' contribution. "Well, if you could contribute 40,000, that would cover most of the major expenses," my mother said, as if asking me to lend them $20 for groceries. "It's an investment in Kevin's happiness, and Jennifer's family will see that we're a successful family too. We can't let them think we can't afford a proper celebration." $40,000, more than half of my total savings, accumulated through 7 years of living like a monk, of denying myself every luxury, of working holidays and weekends while my peers were building careers and relationships. The money I had planned to use for my own education, for my own wedding someday, for the fresh start I had been promising myself for nearly a decade. I looked around the table at their expectant faces. Kevin was nodding encouragingly, as if my contribution was a foregone conclusion. Jennifer was smiling politely, but I could see her mentally adjusting her wedding plans based on my potential contribution. My parents looked relieved, as if my agreement was just a formality before they could start writing checks. "I need to think about it," I said, which was apparently the wrong answer. Kevin's expression shifted to disappointment, then something resembling annoyance. "Sarah, this is really important to me. Jennifer's family is contributing significantly, and I don't want them to think we can't afford a proper wedding. You know I'd do the same for you if you were getting married." The lie in that statement was so obvious it took my breath away. Kevin had never sacrificed anything for me. He had never worked to pay for my education, never deferred his dreams to fund mine, never even offered to help with the store when I was overwhelmed during busy periods or when I was sick. The idea that he would do the same for me was not just false but insulting in its casual dishonesty. Jennifer, trying to maintain the diplomatic facade she had perfected, added with a gentle smile, "Of course, we'd pay you back eventually. Once Kevin makes partner at McKinsey, and we're more established financially, eventually." Another promise of someday, another request to wait for my turn that would never come. I had heard variations of this promise for 10 years, and it had never materialized. My mother, sensing my hesitation, leaned forward with that manipulative warmth she used when she wanted something. "Sarah, you're not getting any younger. At 28, your chances of finding a good husband are limited, but Kevin still has his whole life ahead of him. This investment in his happiness will benefit the whole family for generations. Think of the grandchildren, the connections Jennifer's family will bring, the opportunities that will open up for all of us." The casual cruelty of her words was breathtaking. Not only was she dismissing my dreams and my future, but she was also declaring me essentially past my expiration date as a woman. According to her logic, I should be grateful for the opportunity to fund someone else's happiness, since my own was apparently no longer a realistic possibility. That night, I lay in my childhood bed, staring at the ceiling I had painted with glow-in-the-dark stars when I was 12 and still believed in magic. The stars had faded over the years, barely visible now even in complete darkness, but I could still make out their patterns if I concentrated. I thought about the girl who had dreamed of studying business, of traveling, of building something of her own. I thought about all the times I had said yes when I wanted to say no, all the times I had smiled while dying inside, all the times I had convinced myself that my sacrifice was temporary and meaningful. I realized that my family didn't see me as a person with dreams and ambitions. They saw me as a resource to be utilized, a problem solver who existed to make their lives easier. My father's heart attack had been real, the family's financial struggles had been genuine, but somewhere along the way, my temporary help had become permanent servitude. I had become so good at being useful that they had forgotten I was supposed to be living my own life. The next morning, instead of going directly to the store as I had every day for the past 7 years, I made a detour that would change everything. I drove to UC Berkeley's admissions office, parking in the same visitor lot where I had once come for my original campus tour as a hopeful 17-year-old. The building looked exactly the same, but I felt like a completely different person walking through those doors. I sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes gathering courage before walking inside to inquire about reapplying. The admissions counselor, a kind woman named Ms. Rodriguez who seemed genuinely interested in my story, explained that while my original acceptance had long expired, my high school grades and test scores were still on file. My community college credits would transfer, and I could potentially enter as a junior if I completed a few prerequisite courses. "It's unusual to have someone with your work experience applying," she said, reviewing my file. "Your background managing a family business would actually be quite valuable in our entrepreneurship program. Have you considered that concentration?" For the first time in years, I felt something that resembled hope. The possibility of not just getting a degree but actually building on my practical experience felt revolutionary. I filled out the paperwork, paid the application fee with money from my savings account, and drove home with a secret that felt like a small rebellion burning in my chest. That evening, I sat my family down for dinner and made the announcement that would shatter our carefully maintained dynamic. "I can't contribute $40,000 to Kevin's wedding. I'm using that money to go back to school." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's chopsticks clattered against her bowl. My father's face darkened with an anger I had rarely seen directed at me. Kevin looked genuinely shocked, as if the idea that I might have my own plans had never occurred to him. Jennifer, to her credit, looked uncomfortable, perhaps realizing for the first time that her perfect wedding was being funded by someone else's dreams. "Sarah, don't be selfish," my mother said, her voice sharp with disappointment and something that sounded like panic. "Kevin's wedding is more important than your school dreams. You're 28 years old. It's too late for you to start over. You'll be 30 by the time you graduate, if you even manage to finish." "Too late according to who?" I asked, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I've spent 10 years putting my life on hold. I've worked in this store since I was 8 years old. I've paid for Kevin's tutoring, his sports equipment, his private school applications, his college expenses. I deferred college twice to help this family. When is it my turn?" My father slammed his hand on the table, causing the dishes to jump and Jennifer to flinch. "Your turn? You think life is about turns? You think we had turns when we came to this country with nothing? We worked every day to build something for our children. That's what family means. That's what sacrifice looks like." "No, Dad. That's what you built for Kevin. I've been working just as hard, but none of it was for me. All of it was to support his dreams while mine disappeared. You sacrificed for your children, but I've been sacrificing for my brother while being treated like hired help rather than a daughter." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. My parents exchanged glances, and I could see them processing my words, perhaps recognizing for the first time how unbalanced our family dynamic had become. But instead of acknowledgement, I saw defensiveness hardening their features. Kevin finally spoke up, his voice carrying the defensive tone I remembered from childhood arguments. "Sarah, I never asked you to sacrifice for me. You chose to help. No one forced you to work at the store or defer college. Those were your decisions." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. It was true that no one had physically forced me to make those choices, but the emotional manipulation, the family expectations, and the guilt that accompanied any attempt to prioritize my own needs had been overwhelming. "You never asked because you never had to. You knew I would always say yes. You knew Mom and Dad would always choose your needs over mine. But you're right about one thing, Kevin. I chose to help, and now I'm choosing to stop." Jennifer, who had been silent throughout this exchange, finally spoke up. "Maybe we could have a smaller wedding? I mean, if money is tight for the family." Her suggestion was well-meaning but missed the point entirely. This wasn't about the money being tight. It was about the fundamental expectation that I would continue sacrificing indefinitely. "It's not about the size of the wedding," I said, looking directly at her. "It's about the fact that for 10 years, every family decision has been made based on what's best for Kevin's future. My education was deferred for his opportunities. My career was sacrificed for his success. My savings were accumulated to fund his dreams. I'm 28 years old, and I've never made a single major life decision based on what I wanted. What followed was 3 hours of the most emotionally brutal conversation of my life. My parents accused me of being ungrateful, selfish, and disrespectful. They reminded me of everything they had done for me, conveniently forgetting everything I had done for them. They threatened to disown me, to cut me off completely, to never speak to me again if I refused to help with the wedding. My mother brought up every sacrifice she had made, every difficulty the family had endured, and every way my decision would hurt Kevin's reputation. What will Jennifer's family think? What will our community say when they learn that Kevin's own sister refused to help with his wedding? You're destroying his future for a selfish dream that will probably fail anyway. My father took a different approach, appealing to traditional values and filial duty. In our culture, children take care of their parents and support their siblings. This is how families stay strong across generations. Your American individualism is poisoning you against your own blood. Kevin tried emotional manipulation, talking about how disappointed Jennifer would be, how embarrassing it would be to have a smaller wedding than originally planned, how this was his one chance to make a good impression on his future in-laws. He painted me as the villain in his love story, the selfish sister who would ruin his happiness over money. But something fundamental had shifted inside me during that conversation. For the first time in my life, I was seeing my family clearly, without the filter of obligation and guilt that had clouded my vision for so long. They weren't asking me to help. They were demanding that I sacrifice my future for Kevin's comfort. They weren't treating me like a beloved daughter and sister. They were treating me like an employee who had forgotten her place. "I'm going back to school," I repeated, my voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm reapplying to UC Berkeley for the fall semester. I'm going to study business, and I'm going to build a life that's mine. I love all of you, but I can't keep living for everyone else." My mother started crying, not the quiet tears of sadness, but the angry tears of someone who wasn't getting their way. "If you do this, Sarah, don't expect us to be here when you fail. Don't expect us to take you back when you realize how hard the real world is. You'll be alone, and you'll regret throwing away your family for a piece of paper." The threat was supposed to scare me into compliance, but instead it clarified everything. My family's love was conditional, dependent on my willingness to sacrifice myself for their convenience. Real love wouldn't come with ultimatums. Real love would want me to succeed, to grow, to pursue my dreams. I stood up from the table, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. "I guess we'll see what happens." Jennifer, who had been quietly observing this family meltdown, finally spoke up. Maybe we should postpone the wedding planning until everyone has had time to think about this." It was a diplomatic suggestion, but I could see in her eyes that she was beginning to understand the toxic dynamic she was marrying into. The next few months were the hardest of my life. My parents barely spoke to me, communicating only when absolutely necessary for store operations. The atmosphere in our house was glacial, and every interaction felt like walking through a minefield. Kevin called occasionally, alternating between guilt trips and anger, painting increasingly dramatic pictures of his ruined wedding and Jennifer's disappointment. The family narrative, which I learned about through relatives who felt compelled to share their opinions, painted me as the selfish daughter who had abandoned her responsibilities for frivolous dreams. My aunt called to lecture me about family loyalty. My uncle stopped by the store to suggest that I was having some kind of mental breakdown. Even our longtime customers began treating me differently, as word spread through the community about the family drama. I found a small apartment in the Mission District, a studio that cost more than I wanted to spend but gave me the independence I desperately needed. For the first time in my life, I was living alone, making my own decisions, coming home to a space that was entirely mine. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The apartment was tiny, barely 500 square feet, with a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall and a kitchen that consisted of a hot plate and a mini refrigerator. But it was mine. I could paint the walls any color I wanted, play music at any volume, eat dinner at midnight if I felt like it. The freedom was intoxicating and overwhelming. Working at the store became increasingly uncomfortable. My parents were cold and professional, treating me like a hired employee rather than their daughter. They stopped including me in family discussions about future plans or business decisions. When relatives visited, I was conspicuously excluded from gatherings. The message was clear. I had chosen my path, and I was no longer truly part of the family. The guilt was overwhelming some days. I would see my mother's disappointed face or hear my father's frustrated sighs, and I would wonder if I was making a terrible mistake. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was too old to start over. Maybe the dreams I had clung to for so long were just immature fantasies that I should have outgrown years ago. But every time doubt crept in, I would remember Kevin's casual dismissal of my sacrifices, my mother's certainty that I was too old for dreams, my father's belief that my only value was in my usefulness to others. I would remember the girl who had painted stars on her ceiling and believed in magic, and I would find the strength to keep going. During this period, I also discovered that Kevin and Jennifer's relationship was experiencing some strain. Jennifer had apparently started asking uncomfortable questions about our family dynamic, wondering why Kevin had never mentioned having a sister until recently, and why I was expected to fund their wedding while he had never contributed to the family business. According to my mother's reluctant updates, Jennifer was beginning to see Kevin's entitlement and lack of awareness about his privilege. 3 months after our confrontation, I received my acceptance letter to UC Berkeley. The fall semester would begin in August, giving me time to prepare for the transition. I would be starting as a junior thanks to community college credits I had earned during my gap years and some advanced placement credits from high school that I had never used. At 28, I would be older than most of my classmates, but I was finally going to get my degree. I told my parents about my acceptance over a tense dinner, hoping that seeing my happiness might soften their hearts. Instead, my father looked at me with cold disappointment and said, "I hope you're proud of yourself, Sarah. You've destroyed this family for a piece of paper. When you're struggling to pay rent with your college degree, don't come crying to us." That night, I realized that I needed to make a clean break. I gave my parents 6 weeks' notice, enough time to find and train a replacement for the store. I offered to help with the transition, to teach the new employee everything I knew about the business I had helped build and improve. My mother's response was icy silence, while my father muttered about ingratitude and betrayal. The weeks leading up to my departure were emotionally exhausting. I had to train my replacement, a recent immigrant named Mrs. Liu, who was eager to learn but overwhelmed by the complexity of the operation I had been managing single-handedly. I created detailed manuals for every aspect of the business, from supplier contacts to customer preferences to accounting procedures. Despite everything, I wanted the store to succeed. Kevin's wedding took place in November, 2 months before I started school. I wasn't invited, which shouldn't have surprised me but still felt like a knife in my chest. Kevin called me a week before the ceremony to let me know they had managed to afford a smaller celebration, making sure I understood how my selfishness had forced them to compromise their dreams. I hung up the phone and cried for an hour, not because I regretted my decision, but because I was grieving the family I had thought I had. The love I had believed was unconditional. Through mutual friends, I learned that the wedding had been beautiful but smaller than originally planned. Jennifer looked stunning, Kevin seemed happy, and my parents had managed to maintain their dignity despite the reduced budget. I also heard, through the same network, that Jennifer had asked Kevin's college friends why none of them had ever met his sister, and that her questions had made Kevin visibly uncomfortable. Starting college at 28 was intimidating in ways I hadn't expected. I was surrounded by students who were 8 to 10 years younger, who had parents supporting them through school, who complained about problems that seemed trivial compared to what I had experienced. But I was also more focused than any of them, more grateful for the opportunity, more determined to make the most of every class and every chance to learn. My life experience gave me perspectives that my younger classmates lacked. When we studied family business dynamics, I could speak from direct experience about the challenges of mixing personal relationships with professional responsibilities. When we analyzed case studies about small business management, I had actually lived through similar situations. My professors were impressed by my work ethic and practical knowledge. I studied business with a concentration in entrepreneurship, fascinated by the idea of building something from nothing. Unlike my classmates, who approached business as a theoretical exercise, I understood the daily reality of managing employees, dealing with difficult customers, and making payroll during slow periods. My age and experience, which I had feared would make me an outsider, actually became significant advantages. During my junior year, I started dating Mark, a graduate student in the engineering program who was developing a new type of water filtration system. He was kind and brilliant, and completely uninterested in my family drama. When I told him about my complicated relationship with my parents, he listened without judgment, and then said something that changed my perspective entirely. "Sarah, you didn't abandon your family. You just stopped allowing them to abandon you." The insight was profound and healing. I had been so focused on the guilt of leaving that I hadn't recognized the courage it had taken to stay true to myself. I had spent years being abandoned emotionally while still being expected to provide financially and practically. Setting boundaries wasn't cruel. It was necessary for my survival as an individual. Mark's family, when I eventually met them, provided a stark contrast to my own. His parents were warm and supportive, genuinely interested in his happiness rather than his achievements. They asked about my studies, my goals, and my opinions without any expectation that I would defer to others or sacrifice my own interests. Being around them showed me what healthy family dynamics looked like. My senior year, I started a small consulting business, helping other family-owned shops in Chinatown with their bookkeeping and inventory management. I understood their challenges intimately, and my bilingual skills made me uniquely qualified to bridge the gap between traditional business practices and modern financial systems. The business grew quickly through word of mouth, and I was earning enough to pay for school without taking on debt. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was using the skills I had learned working in my family's store to build my own success. All those years of sacrifice had taught me valuable lessons about business, customer service, and financial management. What had felt like wasted time was actually an unconventional but thorough business education. My consulting clients became like a surrogate family of sorts. Mrs. Wong, who ran a small herb shop, would insist on making me tea during our meetings, and would ask about my studies with genuine interest. Mr. Tanaka, whose family had owned a sushi restaurant for 3 generations, treated me with the respect and appreciation I had never received at home. These business owners understood the value of hard work and sacrifice, but they also recognized my contributions and paid me fairly for my expertise. One afternoon, while helping Mrs. Wong reorganize her inventory system, she made an observation that struck me deeply. "Sarah, you have such wisdom for someone so young. Your family must be very proud of what you've accomplished." When I explained that my family and I were estranged, she looked genuinely puzzled. "But you've turned their lessons into success. You've honored their sacrifice by becoming successful yourself. How can they not see that?" Her perspective helped me realize that I hadn't rejected my family's values. I had simply applied them to my own life instead of exclusively to Kevin's. The work ethic, the financial discipline, the customer service skills, the ability to solve problems under pressure, all of these qualities that my parents had instilled in me were now serving my own dreams rather than everyone else's. During my senior year, one of my professors, Elizabeth Morrison, approached me about entering a business plan competition. I had developed a concept for a platform that would help immigrant-owned small businesses access resources and support in their native languages. The idea combined my personal experience with my academic knowledge, creating something that could genuinely help families like mine while building a sustainable business. Working on the business plan was the first time I had felt truly excited about my future since I was a teenager. The platform would offer everything from basic bookkeeping services to help with permit applications to connections with suppliers who understood the unique needs of immigrant businesses. I envisioned a comprehensive support system that would help families like mine navigate the American business landscape without losing their cultural identity. The research phase was intensive and eye-opening. I discovered that there were thousands of immigrant-owned businesses struggling with the same challenges my parents had faced: language barriers, complex regulations, difficulty accessing capital, and lack of connections to mainstream business networks. Many of these business owners were highly educated and successful in their home countries, but found themselves starting over in America with limited resources and support. I spent months refining my business plan, conducting market research, and developing financial projections. Dr. Morrison provided guidance and encouragement, but the work was entirely mine. For the first time in my life, I was building something that belonged completely to me, something that reflected my values and my vision for how business could be done better. The night before the competition, I called my parents. I hadn't spoken to them in over 6 months, and the conversation was awkward and strained. I told them about the business plan competition, hoping they might show some interest in my achievement. My mother's response was predictably cold. "Sarah, you're playing with fantasies while real businesses need real work. When you're ready to be practical again, you know where to find us." I hung up feeling disappointed but not surprised. Their inability to see my potential had driven me away in the first place, and clearly nothing had changed. But I also realized that their approval was no longer necessary for my success. I had learned to validate myself, to trust my own judgment, to believe in my own worth. The day of the competition, I presented my business plan to a panel of successful entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and business school professors. I wore a navy blue suit that I had bought with money from my consulting business, and I felt confident and professional in a way I had never experienced before. When they asked challenging questions about market penetration and scalability, I answered with the authority of someone who had actually lived the problems I was trying to solve. I won the competition and received a $15,000 grant to develop my business plan further. Standing on the stage accepting the award, I thought about the 21-year-old girl who had been told she was too old for dreams. I thought about all the times I had been called selfish for wanting something for myself. I thought about the family who had valued me only for my utility, and wondered if they would ever understand what they had lost. The local business journal covered the competition, and my story was featured in an article about innovative student entrepreneurs. The article included a photo of me holding my award, and a brief description of my business concept. I was surprised when several of my old customers from the family store saw the article and reached out to congratulate me. Even more surprising was a call from Jennifer. "Sarah, I saw your article in the business journal," she said, her voice hesitant but warm. "I wanted to congratulate you. Your business idea sounds amazing, and I'm really impressed by what you've accomplished." We talked for nearly an hour, and I learned that her perspective on our family had evolved significantly since the wedding. She had noticed Kevin's sense of entitlement, his lack of awareness about his privilege, and his inability to appreciate the sacrifices others had made for his success. She had also started asking questions about why I had been excluded from family events and why my contributions to the family business had never been acknowledged. "Kevin doesn't like to talk about it," she admitted. "He gets defensive whenever I bring up the family dynamics, but I've started to understand that there's a lot more to the story than what I was originally told. I feel terrible about the wedding situation. I had no idea how much you had already sacrificed for the family." Her apology was unexpected and healing. For so long, I had felt like the villain in Kevin's narrative, the selfish sister who had ruined his perfect wedding. Hearing Jennifer acknowledge the unfairness of the situation validated my experience in a way I hadn't realized I needed. Graduation day was bittersweet. Mark's family came to cheer him on, and they had essentially adopted me as well, treating me like another daughter and celebrating my achievements with genuine pride. I sat with them during the ceremony, wearing my cap and gown, and felt a complex mixture of triumph and loss. I had achieved my dreams, but the cost had been higher than I had anticipated. After the ceremony, as I was taking photos with Mark and his family, I saw a familiar figure in the crowd. Kevin was standing about 50 feet away, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses as if he didn't want to be recognized. He had come to my graduation, but he was keeping his distance, perhaps unsure of how I would react to his presence. I excused myself from the photo session and walked over to him. We stood there for a moment, two siblings who had become strangers, both uncertain about how to bridge the gap that had grown between us. "Congratulations," he said finally, his voice quiet and sincere. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I know I've never said that before, but I am." "Thank you," I replied, not sure what else to say. "I'm glad you came." We talked for about 10 minutes, carefully avoiding the painful topics that had driven us apart. He told me about his work, his marriage, his hopes of starting a family soon. I told him about my business plans and my relationship with Mark. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a beginning. A recognition that we were both different people than we had been during the worst of our conflict. That evening, I officially launched my consulting platform, which I had named Bridge Business Solutions. Within 6 months, I had over 50 small businesses using my services, and I was generating enough revenue to hire my first employee. The business filled a real need in the community, and seeing the relief and gratitude of my clients reminded me daily why I had fought so hard for this opportunity. My first major client was a Vietnamese family who owned a chain of nail salons. They were struggling with tax compliance and permit renewals, problems that were compounded by language barriers and cultural differences with regulatory agencies. I spent 3 months working with them to streamline their operations and establish systems that would keep them in compliance going forward. When they saw their first profitable quarter in over 2 years, Mrs. Nguyen, the matriarch of the family, cried and thanked me in broken English for saving their business. Working with families like the Nguyen's reminded me constantly of my own family's struggles and sacrifices. The difference was that these clients appreciated my help, paid me fairly for my expertise, and treated me as a valued professional rather than an obligated family member. The contrast helped me understand that I hadn't been asking for too much from my own family. I had simply been asking for basic respect and recognition. A year after graduation, my platform had expanded to serve immigrant communities in 3 cities, and I was featured in a local business magazine as one of the 30 under 30 entrepreneurs to watch. The article included a photo of me in my small office, surrounded by the laptops and whiteboards that had become the tools of my new trade. The journalist had focused on my journey from family business employee to successful entrepreneur, though I had been careful not to air too much dirty laundry about my personal family dynamics. I was surprised when my mother called me the day the article was published. We hadn't spoken in over 2 years, and hearing her voice was jarring and emotional. Her tone was different than I remembered, less authoritative and more uncertain. "Sarah," she said, her voice tentative and unfamiliar, "I saw the article about your business. Your father and I wanted to congratulate you." The conversation was awkward and careful, both of us navigating around years of hurt and misunderstanding. She told me that the store was doing well, that they had hired someone to help with the books, though they had gone through 3 different employees before finding someone reliable. Kevin and Jennifer had bought a house in Los Angeles and were expecting their first child. My father's health was stable, and they were considering retiring and selling the store in a few years. "We miss you," she said finally, the words heavy with everything left unsaid. "I miss you too," I replied, and meant it. I missed the family I had thought we were, the love I had believed was unconditional, the sense of belonging that had shaped my identity for so long. But I also knew that missing someone doesn't mean you should return to a dynamic that diminished you. I had learned to distinguish between love and obligation, between supporting family and sacrificing yourself. I had learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was essential for maintaining any relationship worth having. The conversation ended with tentative plans to meet for coffee, though neither of us followed through immediately. We were both different people than we had been during the worst of our conflict, but we were also still figuring out what a healthy relationship between us might look like. 6 months later, Kevin called to tell me that Jennifer had given birth to a daughter named Emma. He sounded tired but happy, and for the first time in years our conversation felt natural and genuine. He had been going to therapy, he told me, working through some of the family dynamics that had affected his marriage. Jennifer had insisted on it, and he was beginning to understand patterns of behavior that he had never questioned before. "I've been thinking a lot about how we grew up," he said during that conversation, "about how different our experiences were. I never really saw it before, but I think I understand now why you had to leave. It wasn't a full apology, but it was an acknowledgement, and that felt like progress." He asked about my business, seemed genuinely interested in my success, and even mentioned that he had referred a colleague who was struggling with his family's restaurant to my website. 2 years after that conversation, Kevin and Jennifer visited San Francisco for a family reunion, and they asked me to meet them for lunch. Seeing Kevin with his daughter was a revelation. He was patient and attentive in a way I had never seen before. Fatherhood had changed him, given him perspective on relationships and responsibility that he had previously lacked. During that lunch, Jennifer apologized directly for the wedding situation. "I was young and naive," she said. "I didn't understand the family dynamics, and I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry that my dream wedding became another burden for you to carry." Her apology was genuine and healing, but what touched me most was Kevin's response. "Sarah carried a lot of burdens that should have been mine," he said. "I was too selfish to see it at the time, but I understand now that I benefited from a system that wasn't fair to you." Today, 3 years after graduation, I run a thriving business that employs 12 people and serves over 800 small businesses across 5 states. I married Mark last spring at a small ceremony attended by the friends who had become my chosen family, the people who loved me for who I was rather than what I could provide. My business has been profitable from its 2nd year, and I'm currently exploring options for expanding into online educational content and virtual consulting services. My relationship with my birth family remains complicated but slowly improving. We see each other occasionally, usually for major holidays or milestones. The dynamic is different now, more equal and respectful. They no longer expect me to sacrifice my needs for theirs, and I no longer expect them to prioritize my dreams over their own comfort. We're learning to love each other as adults rather than falling back into the old patterns that had damaged us all. Last Christmas, for the first time in 5 years, I was invited to the family gathering. I went, bringing Mark and a bottle of wine, and spent the evening reconnecting with relatives I hadn't seen since my banishment. My parents were cordial but careful, still uncertain about how to relate to me as an independent adult rather than a compliant daughter. Kevin was warm and genuine, clearly proud of my success, and eager to share stories about Emma's latest milestones. The most surprising moment came when my father, who had always been the most resistant to my independence, pulled me aside near the end of the evening. "Sarah," he said, his voice gruff with emotion, "I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've built. I didn't understand it before, but I see now that you took the lessons we taught you and made them your own. That takes courage." It wasn't a full apology for the years of dismissal and disappointment, but it was an acknowledgement that meant more than I had expected. My father, who had always equated love with control, was learning to love me without trying to manage my choices. I've learned that loving your family doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. I've learned that loyalty to others can't come at the expense of loyalty to yourself. I've learned that the girl who painted stars on her ceiling was right to believe in magic, even when everyone around her tried to convince her that dreams were impractical. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the years I spent working in the store, if I wish I had stood up for myself sooner. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain and the lost opportunities, but I don't regret the lessons I learned about resilience, hard work, and the importance of fighting for your own worth. Those years taught me that I was stronger than I knew, more capable than anyone gave me credit for, and worthy of a life that belonged entirely to me. They taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their worst behaviors. They taught me that family is not just about blood, but about the people who support your growth and celebrate your success. I keep a photo on my desk from my graduation day, not because it was the happiest day of my life, but because it represents the moment I finally chose myself. In the photo, I'm wearing my cap and gown, holding my diploma, and smiling with the kind of joy that comes from achieving something you thought was impossible. Next to it is a more recent photo from my wedding day, surrounded by the friends and chosen family who had supported me through the hardest years of my transformation. Mark is beside me, his arm around my waist, and both of us are laughing at something his sister had just said. It's a picture of the life I built after I learned to believe I deserved one. The stars on my childhood ceiling have long since faded, but I don't need them anymore. I've learned to create my own light, to navigate by my own compass, to build magic from determination and self-respect. The girl who believed in dreams was right all along. She just had to learn that she was worthy of fighting for them.